Today, we talk about two proud programs that have hit rough patches, but who are both hoping to get back to better spots near the top of the sport. Wasn't that long ago that Villanova was at the apex of things in college basketball. Meanwhile, for Georgetown, they've spent a little bit longer wandering through the wilderness, but both feel like they have the coaches in place to get their programs back, not only to the top of the Big East, but to be perennial contenders in the NCAA. So we have the debate. Who is better positioned for success in the new era of college basketball, getting back to the top of the sport? Is it Villanova or is it Georgetown? We talk about it next on Holding Over. And hi, everybody. I'm Matt Janis. Welcome to this edition of Holy Nova, part of the Big East Energy Network. No David White, our usual co-host. He is a North Carolina graduate, remember, and he has decided to enter the witness protection program after Bill Belichick's disastrous debut as head coach of the Tar Heels. We didn't want to make David show his face this week. He has enjoyed some time working through his pain in his law practice, but he will be back with us next week. And as a guy who spent some time on the Georgetown coaching staff on the women's basketball side, I'm sure he will have many thoughts about the conversation we are going to have shortly about who's better positioned to get back to the top of the sport, Georgetown or Villanova. But first, some sad news. Our thoughts and condolences go out to the family of the great George Raveling, who passed away earlier this week at the age of 88. Raveling, a Villanova University graduate. He played for the Wildcats from 1957 until 1960. He also served as an assistant coach for 3 years early in his career before moving on to Maryland, where he became the first ever Black assistant coach in the ACC. He was a trailblazer in many ways, and what a life he lived for sure. Here's a guy who was present for Martin Luther King Jr.'s I Have a Dream speech. And not only was he present, he was great or close enough to the great Dr. King that after the speech ended, he actually was able to go up to him and ask him for a copy of the speech. And much to Raveling's surprise and delight, King not only handed him a copy of the speech, he handed him his copy of the speech. So he kind of became the stalwart of that piece of history for the rest of his life. And what an incredible piece of history to have at your fingertips. It was something that he took incredible pride in. He shared the story with Sports Illustrated and several other media outlets late in his life. And it was just a remarkable watch. Highly recommend checking it out on YouTube. He also went on to work for Nike and was instrumental, many say, in that brand landing Michael Jordan as a guy that would partner and becomes as synonymous with the brand as any athlete in the history of sports. MJ was on the 1984 Olympic team, and Raveling was an assistant coach on that team, started telling him the virtues of Nike, and the sales pitch must have taken hold because his airness, as he would later be known as, thanks to the execs at Nike, decided to sign with the team swoosh, and the rest is history. But it was a guy that coached for more than 3 decades, had a great playing career at Villanova, had a huge impact on people, and the testimonials to his life and what he meant to people that came pouring in this week were remarkable to hear. It was clear he was a special human being, and his family put out a statement this week. There are no words to fully capture what George meant to his family, friends, colleagues, former players, and assistants, and to the world. He will be profoundly missed, yet his aura, energy, divine presence, and timeless wisdom live on in all those he touched and transformed. And the Raveling family is certainly in all of our thoughts. The Villanova family has put out numerous statements talking about what he meant not just to the basketball program, but to the university as a whole. Jay Wright, at the top of that list, has always spoken so glowingly about Raveling, and this week certainly no exception to that. And a life well lived, and is certainly a guy that experienced a ton during his 88 years on Earth. And rest in peace, George Raveling, the Villanova graduate from 1960. No easy way to transition from that, so we'll just move on to basketball. We're going to talk about who is better positioned in terms of their long-term prospects to get back to both the top of the Big East and the top of college basketball in general. Yeah, that's the level that these two programs have spent multiple stages of their history habitating. Villanova, Georgetown. We're going to welcome in Bleeding Blue and Gray podcast co-host Rasheem Carvin to get his perspective on the Hoyas. And remember, Georgetown, not only a longtime rival of Villanova, they have so much shared history, and now the commonality of the new Big East and everything that has meant for the sport of basketball and these Catholic institutions. But it's also a team that, in many ways, Villanova and Georgetown have kind of been looking towards each other as shining stars and guiding lights of both what to be and what not to be. Georgetown looking towards Villanova. Hey, there is a path back. We can accomplish what they were able to accomplish. We've done it before. Look what they've done. We can do it again. Meanwhile, for Villanova, after Jay Wright retires, kind of looking towards where Georgetown struggled and learning from those pratfalls and how to avoid them and how to avoid the same type of fate. So without further ado, let's welcome in our guest, Rasheem Carvin of the Bleeding Blue and Gray podcast. And we are very happy to welcome in our guest, Rasheem Carvin of the Bleeding Blue and Gray podcast, part of the Big East Energy Network. Rasheem, this is going to be so much fun. We appreciate you taking the time to do this.
No, thank you for having me, Matt. I'm really looking forward to our discussion.
Who would have thought that Villanova and Georgetown would find more similar common ground after so intertwined the programs are from that fairy tale of a day from Villanova's perspective on April Fool's 1985 to how things have evolved over the years. But now you have two big-time programs that are not at all where they want to be. You can kind of pick your analogy for what you want to use to describe it. To me, it almost seems like two big ships that have kind of hit rough seas and are just trying to find a wave that can take them to calmer ground where they can get back to the type of cruising speed that they are searching for. In your mind, Georgetown has been through it a little bit longer now than Villanova. They were obviously rocked by the retirement of Jay Wright. How has it taken so long for Georgetown to refine its footing among the games of the league?
So before I answer that, Matt, can I spend a second to talk about the similarities between these two schools?
Yes.
Okay, so obviously they're both private Catholic schools. They're both very expensive. They both cost about 85 grand a year with all inclusive fees. They both have about 7,000 undergraduate students. They're both in, Philly and DC have about the same amount of people, metro area, about 6 million. Both have, really good, strong high school basketball. And of course, Willard and Cooley are friends. So there's a lot that they share in common. To answer your question about how Georgetown got this in this place, the end of JT3 was pretty rough. He started off very hot. He had a couple Sweet 16s. He had a Final Four. And then he had a lot of flameouts in the tournament starting about 2009. And by the end, the program was in tatters, and it was really time for him to go. And then the hiring of Ewing was just a bad idea. And I always thought from the beginning, this works out, he'll probably go back to the pros, and because he's always wanted a pro job. But then if it doesn't work out, then how are you going to fire, the best player in the history of your program? So he had 6 years, which is incredible to think about. I can't believe I lived through the nightmare for 6 years. So Georgetown's had about a decade of being bad. before Cooley arrived. And Cooley's coming up on year 3, so but he's got to put up or shut up this year. He's got to make the tournament.
It was a perfect storm for Georgetown too, because it was back-to-back hires of guys where, I mean, what are you going to do? John Thompson, the third, obviously the son of the legend, the guy that built the place pretty much from square one, and then the best player in program history, the iconic guy inside the program in Patrick Ewing. You understand why both hires were made. But boy, in retrospect, doing it back-to-back might have been the toughest thing, because how do you divorce yourself from back-to-back legends like that?
Right, and you have to, if I go back a little further, Craig Esherick, who was Thompson's first, top assistant, took over after Thompson resigned suddenly in '99. And Esherick was not a great hire, but at least, he made the tournament a couple times. So no program can sustain this amount of bad hiring and not feel it.
And here's where the similarities really hit home, because I've made this joke to David White a couple times, and I mean it with all due respect, because I think that Villanova and Georgetown, very similar programs in terms of their historic appeal and historic state inside of the Big East and college basketball as a whole. But when Jay Wright retired, I think every Villanova fan's biggest worry, especially with the quick hire of Kyle Neptune, was, oh my goodness, is history going to repeat itself? And the big ask of Kyle Neptune was, just don't turn Villanova into Georgetown 2.0. And Craig Esherick, it was the same type of thing. You hire an assistant. He was a guy that had direct ties to the legendary head coach. You try to give him every opportunity to help it make it work. You have the guy that retired that is still around and still willing to kind of help a hand when the opportunity presents itself, and trying to help get his lieutenant over the finish line. And both good guys. I think everybody liked Craig Esherick. Everybody likes Kyle Neptune. And it just never worked out in either scenario. And so that's why we wanted to have this conversation with you, because it's kind of a two-part thing. We're going to look forward to the future and see which one of these programs might be better suited for long-term success and short-term success in the modern era of college basketball. But also, it's kind of a cautionary tale of what you just alluded to, of the pratfalls that Villanova can try to avoid here on this next hire. And these next few years are also critical, because, John Thompson the third, say what you will about him, but he did right the proverbial ship there for a little while with Georgetown. Got him to a Final Four. They were a perennial, 1, 2, 3 seed there for a few years, and he got the program back to what felt like respectability, and they were able to build upon that. Now, he let it slip back, and that was its own separate problem, but he did at least get it out of the wilderness for a little while, right?
Yeah, he did. Like I said, JT3 was great for the first half of his tenure there. And then he had so many high-profile upsets in the tournament. Ohio comes to mind. Steph Curry and Davidson, before anybody knew who Steph Curry was. And the one that was personally most embarrassing for me was Florida Gulf Coast. So.
I was about to say.
And they were a 2 seed. They were a 2 seed. No one had even heard of Florida Gulf Coast.
I was in Philly. I was in Philadelphia, right up the road. No doubt about it. And it is kind of funny, because Florida Gulf Coast ended up being much better than we all ever dreamed of. And obviously, Steph Curry was what Steph Curry was at Davidson. I just actually watched that game on YouTube not too long ago. Georgetown didn't play a bad game that day. Nobody was beating Steph Curry that day.
That's exactly right. And then they went on. I think they won did they go to the Elite Eight that year?
They did. Yep.
They did. Yeah.
They got one step short of the Final Four. It was a fairy tale run. Unfortunately, they got started with their first big win over Georgetown. So, okay, that's how we got to where we are now. Everybody that has watched the Holy Nova podcast kind of knows what Villanova has been dealing with through the Kyle Neptune era. So now both programs feel like they have found the guy that they need in place to take those strides towards getting back to where they want to go. Obviously, Ed Cooley has a head start. He's been there for a couple of years. Kevin Willard starting at the ground floor, but less that he had to rubble, that he had to kind of crawl his way out from underneath of, as opposed to what we talked about during the Patrick Ewing era. In your mind, short term, where is Georgetown right now at the moment? Where do you feel How do you feel about the Ed Cooley era going into year 3?
I feel good. So the first year, it was tough, right? It was more suffering. They had a bad out-of-conference schedule. They didn't have the talent to compete in the Big East. I was, by midseason, I realized this team was just going nowhere. Year 2, I think if they had stayed healthy, they would have made a tournament team. No, obviously, no one expected either Micah Peavy or Thomas Sorber to be as good as they were. It was a nice surprise, but they just had too many injuries that piled up, whether it be Sorber or Mack or Jaden Epps. They just couldn't. They were never healthy basically after mid-December the rest of the year. So year 3, they've been very active in the portal. They're going to have a lot of guards, a lot of big guards that they can throw at people. They should be great on the defensive end. They're going to play very fast. So I expect them to make the tournament this year. I would be very disappointed if they didn't make the tournament this year.
What has you? I've heard you say that before on your show, the Bleeding Blue and Gray podcast. What has you feeling so optimistic? What is it that stands out most in terms of why you think it clicks in year 3?
Well, and this is sort of a Cooley's pattern, right? And this is what he did at Fairfield. This is what he did at Providence. This is probably the most Cooley-like team that he's had at Georgetown. He schedules according to how he feels his team will be, and the non-conference schedule is as good as I've been watching Georgetown basketball since the 90s. This is probably one of the most competitive non-conference schedules that I've ever seen. When I was in college at Georgetown, they would play like Army Fort Hood and St. Leo's. So this is not that. So I think he's confident. That gives me confidence.
You look at these programs. Villanova is obviously in a very different spot in terms of the building under Kevin Willard in his first season in charge, but they brought in a lot of pieces out of the portal as well. The one thing that Villanova has been able to adjust to pretty quickly in the modern era of college basketball has been the name, image, likeness game. The support has been there financially. You could argue how they went about building the pieces from that NIL game hasn't necessarily worked out quite as well as they would have hoped, especially considering the resources that they had put towards trying to build that roster. It was very win now, 1 or 2 critical pieces, try to put them in place and kind of surround Eric Dixon with as much talent as possible and then just figure out the rest from there. It wasn't much team building. It was more accrue pieces and try to hope that you can make them fit. And we saw how that worked out the last 2 years. So now Kevin Willard has taken a little bit of a different path, and it feels like he's built more of a team. But the rankings, consequently, not as high in terms of years past from what we've seen for Villanova from additions, both in the recruiting class. I think they did pretty well, especially grabbing a Caden Lewis late in the process. But transfer portal, they were mid-50s, and that's not what we had seen in years past from this Wildcat program. But Willard feels like he was able to put pieces in place that'll be there for multiple years. And while they are going to have to grow together and click really quickly, they're going to have this season. And if everything goes to plan, he feels like he has connections with guys that they'll be here for multiple years. They have multiple years of eligibility. And one of the things that he had conversation with them about in the process was, I don't want you to just think of this as come for this year and then see what happens and maybe find a new home next year. This is a long-term proposition. So he's kind of constructing things a little bit differently than what we saw. But the big difference, at least in years past, Villanova's resources seemed like they were lined up a little bit better than Georgetown's. And that's one of the reasons why they felt so good about being able to get off the mat as quickly as they did, even though it didn't work out. It does feel like, though, that Georgetown has found those resources and seems to have understood how to get a little bit more funding in place. Is that a fair way to describe it?
Yeah, I think that's a fair way to describe it. Georgetown's a very slow-moving, conservative place. They're never going to be at the forefront of any of these movements. They were somehow behind on NIL, despite the fact that the chairman of the board of the NCAA was the president of Georgetown. So, that was 2021, and that when the ruling came down, Georgetown did not really get active till late 2023, 2024 with their collective. Duke hired the first GM back in 2022. Georgetown didn't get a GM till like a month ago. So they are just always in favor of waiting and seeing how things pan out. One thing, they have done a great job with raising money for NIL. I think they're on solid footing with that. But a move they made that I didn't quite like was they folded their collective. And so now they're going to do everything in-house after the house settlement. Why, I don't know. I assume it's because they like the control that offers them. But I think they have a good grip on that. But it's an arms race. Every year, more and more is needed just to tread water.
Well, it is going to be really interesting to see how that house settlement plays out, because obviously you have the Deloitte clearinghouse, and the hope for a lot of these programs are that it's going to get back to more traditional NIL, and then it'll be direct revenue sharing, and you can go up to the limit. I'm still skeptical how that's all going to work out. It seems like every tea leaf that gets read seems more and more like it's going to be a combination of the two systems, but NIL, the old-fashioned way that we came to know it the last several years, is still going to be in place, and so that will be something to keep an eye on. But when you look at what these programs are doing well right now, for Villanova, I think the fan support is still a little bit greater in terms of attendance and numbers. Georgetown has always had a hard time getting that consistent attendance up, especially considering the fact, Villanova plays a few games a year in Philadelphia. Georgetown plays almost all of their games, if not all of their games, down in Washington, D.C. Oh, granted, the campus is in D.C. too, but in a completely different section.
Yeah, Capital One Arena. Yeah, Capital One Arena is about 3 miles from campus. Yeah.
And not a quick 3 mile commute, if I remember things.
So, yeah,
exactly. How have they been able to overcome that? And in your mind, how big of an impediment is that to them in both the short and long term?
So attendance is something I obsess over, actually. And I'm always looking around when I go to games, and then I always check afterwards what the box score, what the attendance was. So I think it is a talking point for people who really don't want to go, to complain that it's far away, but they actually have free buses for students to take, to get to the arena. They don't get there. They get there usually right before tip off, which is not great, but it's convenient enough. I think what you see with the low attendance are two things. One, you can't be bad for a decade and not see a drop off, right? And alienate fans and alumni and all that. And then two, they haven't, not only have they not been good, but they haven't scheduled great. So it's really hard to get people to come out for that. The last couple of years, I felt that people have hope now for the first time in a while. The UConn game that we hosted, we got 17,000 people there, which is huge. For those who don't know, Capital One Arena is an NBA arena. It sits about 20,000. So even, let's say, the last peak of Georgetown basketball was like 2012, 2013, Otto Porter, those teams, they averaged about 12,000, 11 or 12,000 a game, which is a lot. But in a 20,000 seat arena, it's half empty.
And the atmosphere, that's always the killer thing. I will still always remember, Villanova went through something very similar during the end of the Steve Lapis era. They always played those 4 or 5 games a year down at what was then the Wells Fargo Center. I think it's now called the Xfinity Center. The names, it's always tough to keep up with the business of sports, what's called what. But it was for years. If they got to 14, 15,000, that was a pretty good turnout. And pretty much from a year or two after the Kerry Kittles era until the early days of the Jay Wright era, it was still struggling. And, no better example of that than the game everybody points to as the turnaround game under Jay Wright was when they beat Kansas the day of the NFC Championship game with the Eagles, who, by the way, I'm representing after the Super Bowl champs get started.
You ready for Thursday?
Yeah, when this airs, you'll know whether I'm a happy guy or not, whether they were able to beat the Cowboys in the season opener. But bring up the Eagles because that was the day before the NFC Championship when they beat the Falcons. It was a snowstorm. But even without the snowstorm, there was only going to be 14, 15,000 people there. That was the number 2 ranked team in the country against a Villanova team that had started to build some momentum and would eventually get to the Sweet 16. And it was a good atmosphere, but it wasn't a special college basketball atmosphere. And then the very next season, they played a game against Syracuse, and actually traffic was horrible trying to get into the building. And we didn't get to our seats until right before opening tip. And I just remember walking in and looking around and saying, wow, they are truly back. It was a complete sellout. Every seat was full. People were into it. And that was kind of the mark of this thing has returned. And to Jay Wright's credit, even when he slid back for a year or two, he was able to keep the fan base engaged and keep the crowd up and keep the energy up and make going to those games down in Philadelphia special events. It helps that you only have to play 4 or 5 there a year as opposed to taking the bus down every single time like Georgetown does. But that was the one thing I thought Villanova had going for them. That has slid a little bit the last couple of years, though, to be honest. And you see, for the first time, really since I was a kid, Villanova looking for season ticket holders and talking about season ticket packages. The wait list used to be insane to try to get those types of things. So the world for Villanova has rocked at the foundation a little bit, and it feels like a fulcrum point for the fan base of which direction are we going to go. And I think that's why Kyle Neptune had the short leash that they unfortunately for him had to deal with, and they had to make a change to Kevin Willard to make sure that they could keep the fans engaged. And yet again, meaning this in no disrespect, but it really was for Villanova. Georgetown in a lot of ways has kind of been that North Star of this is the path you want to try to avoid. And does that make sense when you hear Wildcat? I know it's probably not the most fun thing to hear, but do you hear where we're kind of coming from?
No, I'm not insulted at all. First of all, you never want to be the guy that follows the guy, right? That almost never works.
Very true.
But it's, yeah, I mean, for years, I would say as a Georgetown fan, I'd think, why can't we be Villanova, right? Why can't we? We're fighting for probably a lot of the same players, probably have a lot of the same restrictions. But obviously Villanova having a great hire, Jay Wright, and he was there for 21 years. Yeah, you shouldn't want to be where Georgetown was for the last decade. You shouldn't. It should be a cautionary tale. It should be a cautionary tale primarily to Georgetown. So if Nova can learn something, that's fine.
And so now you just hit on the next topic perfectly. It's almost like you're a host or something. It's we're with Rashid Carmen of the Bleeding Blue and Gray podcast. But the thing that makes these two programs similar, aside from playing in the same conference and all the shared history that they have mined the same area of the country over the years with remarkable consistency. The DMV, the second part of Jay Wright's career, he made his bones in the DMV. So many of those players on those national championship teams came from that area of the country. And Georgetown needed to get it back if they want to become what they're hoping to become. Yeah. It feels like it's going to be fun recruiting battles between Ed Cooley and Kevin Willard over the next few years.
So I made a list of some of the guys that I can just remember off the top of my head who are from the DMV who played at Nova in this century. Scotty Reynolds, Josh Hart, Brandon Slater, Dwayne Anderson, Sadiq Bey, Justin Moore. Eric Dixon's not technically from the DMV. He's a little outside area, but he's 30 miles north of DC. So that's pretty close. So probably nobody has benefited more from the demise of Georgetown basketball than Villanova. I remember hearing Jay Wright saying what he loves about the DMV, other than obviously the quantity and quality of the players, is that the best athletes here, they all play basketball. So it's not like Texas, right, where the best players are playing football. And then the schools are very good, right? So you're not going to have eligibility problems. You're going to have, kids that are pretty sound and can take care of business in the classroom.
So do you feel like there's an easy path back in that regard for Georgetown there?
It's not easy, but it's simple. They got to start recruiting the DMV much better. And one of the things that has actually not been a strength of the program for a while is getting the best kids to stay home. And that goes back to Big John. I don't know if you know this, but he was in a grudge match with Morgan Wooten, who's probably one of the greatest high school coaches ever. Stemming from,
remember hearing those stories.
From the 70s, right? The 70s when Thompson himself was a high school coach. So at some point, he just stopped recruiting DeMatha guys. This is DeMatha maybe is the best high school program in the country at this time, and in his backyard, and he just wouldn't touch those guys. Ironically, he sent JT3 to DeMatha, so he obviously thought highly of Morgan Wooten as a coach. They have not. Yeah, they had burned so many bridges with AAU and high school coaches for so many years that Cooley and his staff have really had to mend those fences. And I think they're doing a good job, but it takes a while to reestablish these things. And they're starting to, they're offering DC guys much earlier and more often, and people are starting to see that they're serious about recruiting DC players. But I don't know if you follow college football at all, but I'm a big Michigan fan, and Michigan used to dominate Ohio State when I was growing up. And then Tressel came in, and the first thing Tressel says is, "I'm closing off Ohio. You're not getting in here. You're not getting our best kids." And that one of the dirty secrets of Michigan football. All the best Michigan football players have always come from Ohio.
So many. Yep. Desmond Howard. Yeah. Charles Woodson. Anyway, but back to us. So I think Ed's got to do the same thing. He's got to find some way to cordon off the DMV. So that programs like Villanova and Duke's also dined out pretty well in the DMV. Can't come in and get those players. And that's the funny thing about the DMV. There's so much depth. You can afford one or two losses. Mm-hmm. You just can't have multiple programs coming in and kind of living in your backyard.
And it takes a long time. It takes a long time to repair things, right? And they're not. And Villanova's just not going to say, "Yeah, we fought. They're not just going to walk away, right? So these are going to be the recruiting battles are going to intensify.
And Villanova's kind of going through that same thing where because they were so heavy through the portal in the new era of college basketball, but also in that just understandable win now, no matter what mode under Kyle Neptune, as he was trying to find his footing and make sure he could solidify himself in charge of the program. They're trying to rebuild their recruiting ties. And I think Kevin Willard and his staff have done a pretty good job so far, but so have Ed Cooley. It's going to be a fun arms race, so to speak, to see who can end up winning out. So one other thing that you mentioned. Go ahead.
I was going to say one thing, a similarity between those two guys that I think is going to be really interesting to monitor is they're both development guys, right? And Willard in particular has always brought stability to these programs that he's been at. How do you maintain that in the portal, right? How do you build culture, right? How do you build a program when you're putting it together a team year after year?
Yeah, because that is one thing that we have heard both of those coaches talk about over the year. Culture. It was a pretty strong culture that Kevin Willard was able to build at Seton Hall. And Ed Cooley, obviously, family was something he always preached at Fairfield, at Providence. He's tried to bring that to Georgetown as well. But in the new realities of college sports, that's a harder thing to build. Sometimes it takes some time to really lay that foundation because you don't have those natural handoffs year over year where you have 3 or 4 guys left inside your program that have been there for a long time that can explain to the younger guys exactly what the expectations are. One of the reasons perhaps why Jay Wright is no longer the head coach at Villanova because of the evolution and the changes in the college game. And you mentioned Big John at Georgetown, and that's another thing that is kind of interesting to keep an eye on. I think Jay Wright is much more of a hands-off guy around the Villanova program than John Thompson was after he walked away. And the situation is obviously very different now. Kyle Neptune was Jay Wright's protege, but Kevin Willard, while they're very close friends and they had a very good personal relationship and professional relationship battling against each other in the Big East, they were never on the same staff. And so it is a different shared professional bond than what John Thompson had with Craig Esherick's follower, who was his son, obviously, and John Thompson III, and then Patrick Ewing, who was the best player he ever had. But Big John's personality, by the end of the John Thompson, the third days, and then Patrick Ewing's tenure kind of became a little bit too overshadowing or too strong, heavy-handed, whatever the adjective you want to pick. And that's just something that Villanova, again, Jay Wright's a different guy. I don't think Jay Wright's the type of guy that would ever put too much of his opinion on a scale and try to pressure people into doing too many things. But you have to embrace your legends and make sure they're still a huge part of the program. But there also has to be that line of demarcation of, hey, it's the current head coach's job, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's something Cooley has tried to face head on, even from his first press conference. He said, we respect our past, but this is not the 80s. This is not the old Georgetown. But Hoya paranoia is no longer the deal around here. And I think that's a smart thing to say. I think, the program was too insular, right? So after John Thompson, you had his top assistant, then you had his son, then you had his best player. And he never left. I mean, he almost never left campus. I think he maintained an office there after he retired. He would show up to JT3's practices. I don't know what his relationship was in terms of being around for Patrick, but it's it's a tough road to walk between embracing those legends and thanking them for what they did. There's no way Georgetown is the university as it is, not just basketball program, without Big John Thompson and what he did, the profile of the place. But you don't get to run things forever, right?
Well, and and both guys walked away before anybody was anticipating that their time would come to an end. They were both still relatively young guys when they left the position. And again, drastically different scenarios. I think John had such a direct connection to the guys that followed him. And also, in John Thompson's defense, he built Georgetown. And Jay Wright will be the first person to tell you, he didn't build Villanova. Villanova had a much richer tradition before he got there. Not that Georgetown was nothing before John Thompson.
But you can say nothing. You can say nothing.
I think that would be a fair, he literally built the program into something that not only people cared about, that became a national phenomenon for a decade there. So whereas Jay Wright took something that was really good and made it great, but it was really good before he got there. There is a history. They had multiple coaches that got the Final Four. So it didn't feel like it was his so much as he was the guy in charge of it at the moment. And so maybe that makes things a little bit easier, too, for him to find his role within the program. But it is something that you always have to monitor because no matter how good of intentions you could have. I mean, the perfect example that David and I talked about a few weeks ago was, early in Kyle Neptune's tenure, Jay Wright would come to some practices and the media might catch a picture or a little video of him talking to players up in the stands. I'm sure that was a harmless conversation. He knew those guys. They were his former players. He wasn't coaching the team from the stands. But when things aren't going right, that's not necessarily the picture that you want out there for the fans, for the alumni. It just is unsettling. For whether that's fair or not, perception is such an important part of life.
Are there still people who want Jay Wright to come back? Because obviously
everybody wants Jay Wright to come back. I mean, let's be real here. Like Kevin Willard, I think people are excited about that. They want to see what he brings to the table. But if you said tomorrow, when Jay Wright announced he was retiring from TV a couple days ago, the entire Villanova community, they knew it didn't mean anything, but they double checked and they were researching and just making sure there wasn't any kind of a weird shocker coming. If they could throw everybody out and just bring Jay Wright back, they would do it in a second.
Wow, that's loyalty. That's impressive. I didn't see that. He retired from TV. He's only been on TV a couple of years, right?
Yeah, and it is kind of funny because one of the reasons he gave was to be able to give more of a commitment to Villanova. He is a special advisor to the president of the university, and he really does care about the place. And the one thing that everybody universally says about Jay Wright is what a selfless human being he is. So again, it's not a real concern in terms of would he ever overstep his bounds or would he ever get in the way. But perception is kind of more the concern in terms of just constantly being there. And it's just always worth mentioning, at least, because if you're talking Villanova, you're talking Georgetown, and you're talking about how Georgetown got there, how Villanova can kind of learn from that to avoid a similar fate. Honoring John was critical. It had to happen. You had to always make him feel at home at Georgetown. But somewhere along the line, that crossed from honoring John and making him feel like it was still his home to letting him still quasi-run things at times. And that's not a good place to be.
No, absolutely not. And, we'll always be in his debt, right? Grateful for what he built. But we got to keep moving forward. Yeah.
All right, so moving forward, you like this year's team for Georgetown.
I like this year's too. They're not going to win pretty. I'm still curious as to where the shooting is going to come from, but the defense is going to be really good. I think the guards are going to get after it. They're all big and physical. Vince Iwuchukwu looked great at Global Jam. Julius Halafanua, I have had a little bit of a disappointing Global Jam, but he's young. He hasn't played a lot of games. He was hurt last year. And he's a 7-footer with, legit 7-footer who's got some pretty good skills. So I'm excited. I'm excited to see what this team can do.
All right. So, and I know you're not as high on this year's Villanova team. We've talked about that. You put together a great Twitter Spaces a couple weeks ago where we got everybody together from the Big East Energy Network and other schools around the conference. And it seemed like everybody wasn't all that high on Villanova's prospects this year.
Yeah, I think it's year one, right? Willard's got to figure out a lot of things. So I think, I think they'll be above 500. They've got a good amount of talent, but I think it's going to take, things take a while to settle and to figure things out. And like I said, Willard's a developmental guy. So some of these guys are just going to have to stew, right? And he's got to find the right mix before they really emerge.
All right, we're going to play our game now in multiple parts. Sheena, I've been really excited for this. Here's what we're looking at. We're going to talk about short term in terms of this year, and you've kind of already answered that. You feel like Georgetown's in a better position for success. We're going to look at the shorter long term, the next 2 to 3 years, who's in a better position, the mid long term, the next 5 years or so, and then long term down the road. So we will look at it from those stretches of who you think is better positioned and why for success and can win this battle that we kind of discussed between Villanova and Georgetown for DMV superiority on the recruiting trail and for success and taking that traditional power inside the Big East lane. But before we do that, I want to start with, let's kind of put our chips on the table, looking at the others program. In your mind, what should realistic expectations be for Georgetown in your mind? And then what do you think they should be for Villanova?
So I think for Georgetown, it's a tournament. I don't think a high seed. I think somewhere in the teens, but they should feel good about. They should only feel good if they make the tournament. Narrowly missing is not enough.
But if you build, okay, so that's for this year. But in terms of when you get to where you want this program to be, what do you think that they should perennially be looking at Georgetown under Ed Cooley?
Oh, I think they should be a top 4 or 5 seed in the tournament every year, and then every few years get to the Final Four.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's. I mean, every year. I'm not. Every year maybe seems a little strong to me. They should be a tournament team every year.
They should, yep.
And they should be a team that is in position to be a serious top 10, top 15 program once or twice every 5 years to me. And if they are better than that, that is Ed Cooley not overachieving, but taking them to, they're probably as good as they can be right now. And then maybe we'll reevaluate from there. But to me, once every 5 to 10 years, they're making a serious run at a Final Four. 2 times or out of 5, they should be a legit top 10 to top 15 team where you're expecting, if you don't make the Sweet 16, it is a true disappointment. You're frustrated with the program, and then you should be in the tournament almost every single year. Stuff's going to happen. You're going to miss every once in a while, but almost every single year, Georgetown should be a tournament team. To me, that seems like it would be a fair benchmark. But I hear what you're saying. The ceiling, I think what you just alluded to is the ceiling for Georgetown. That's what exactly they can be. Is that right. Would that be fair in your mind?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, I was talking more about the ceiling, but I think you're right. Every year in the tournament should be doable. And 1 to 5 seed. I want to feel like they have a chance. They don't have to win it all every year. They don't have to go to the Final Four, but I have to feel like, they got a shot. They got a reasonable shot to make it.
All right, so walk me through from a Georgetown guy's perspective, what you feel like the expectations for Villanova fans should be.
So once they pull everything together.
Yeah, long term. Obviously, I know you think that they're going to be. I actually agree with you that I think there will be some growing pains. I think where we maybe disagree this year is when it clicks for Villanova. I think they'll click by conference play. You think it might take deep into conference play, if not next year. That's fair. But long term, if Willard gets things going, what should the expectations be?
So just like Georgetown, tournament team every year, I think they should regularly get to the Sweet 16. And then I would say high seeds in the tournament if he really gets things going. And like I said with George, you should feel as a Villanova fan that this team could get to a Final Four. It's not going to happen every year. It's not going to happen most years, right? But you should feel, we got something. We got something here. Things break our way. We can get to the Final Four.
See, and that's interesting because that was some of the pushback. We played this expectation game a little bit in one of our early shows, and one of the pushbacks we got from some Villanova fans was that you weren't optimistic enough about the high end in terms of what the expectations should be. That Villanova fans understand they're not going to go to the Final Four every year, but they'd like to be shooting for the Final Four more years than they're not. Whereas I thought they were going to be loading up for a Final Four run once or twice every 5 to 10 years. And because I think you have to be honest that Jay Wright, much like John Thompson, these were special individuals. Mm-hmm. Everybody's had success at Villanova. A lot of people have had success at Georgetown, but nobody's had success like Big John and Jay Wright in terms of consistency and in terms of top-end success. So if you're going to make everybody that comes subsequently live up to that standard, you're probably going to be disappointed. That's, to me, why I still think it's a half rung down. I think it when people talk about Villanova being a blue blood, can they get back there again? I mean, they were a blue blood there for a little while, and they had the history to kind of back up being moved into that echelon. But they didn't cement their status there the way that, quite frankly, UConn has cemented their status amongst the Blue Bloods, because they've done it with multiple coaches. They've done it in multiple eras, and it's been 25 to 30 years now of not just sustained success, but sustained upper echelon success outside of 5 or 6 years of hiccups. For Villanova, it's been a long time since they've had that type of level of sustained success before Jay Wright. It had been 2 decades. Rowdy Massimino had rolling in the early 80s. They got to a bunch of Elite Eights, but they weren't a Final Four perennial program. They had one magical run in 1985. And if you put truth serum in most Villanova fans, I don't think that they thought that they would be a perennial Final Four threat at any point in the future, until they learned what Jay Wright was all about. And then it understandably kind of changed expectations and changed viewpoints. But Jay Wright, unfortunately, hung it up. And now the world of college athletics, he did it at a time that was not ideal for Villanova, because it was right as everything was evolving and changing. And that was tough. So to me, it's kind of that just a step below, but I understand where your head's at. And I think a lot of Villanova fans actually agree with you more than they agree with me, that they want to go in expecting a chance at a Final Four 3-4 years out of 5. They're not going to get there 3-4 times out of 5, but they want to expect, hey, this team, if it all gels by the end of the year, could be a Final Four team. Basically, they want the Jay Wright era to happen again.
Fans often, when you've had the type of success you've had, right, you want it to last forever. You think it can last forever, but it's hard to win at Villanova. It's hard to win at Georgetown. It's not like being at Duke. It's not like being at Kansas, where you just have far more resources. A place like Kansas, a lot easier to get kids in, a lot more tolerant of a behavior that probably might get you fired or get you kicked out of school at a place like Villanova. So you should not, you can't. There are some of those kids you're just not going to be able to get, right? So Villanova's not going to roll out multiple 5-stars every year. Kansas can, Duke can. So you just got to pick your spots, man. You got to have realistic expectations and just enjoy. If you get on a run, you got to enjoy it.
Okay, here's where the battle comes, though. Now, who in your mind? Give me the short. We talked about next year what we think, or this upcoming season what we think. How about the next couple years? Do you think Cooley has them rolling in the next 2 to 3 years, and Villanova's going to have a hard time playing catch up?
I think he's got them rolling. He's got a head start on Willard. He's more incentivized because of that, right? Because he's got to get a contract extension. I think Willard definitely by year 3, they're a tournament team, and he's figured out how he's going to build the program in his image.
See, I think that they're in a good spot next year. I think Kevin Willard building towards next year. I really do believe that. I think that by the end of this season, Villanova is going to be playing at an NCAA tournament level. Mm-hmm. I just don't know if they're going to have enough success in the non-conference portion of the season because of all the new pieces that they have in place to put together a tournament resume, if that makes sense. Because they've got some tough non-conference games. I mean, they start right away against BYU. I don't love Villanova's chances in that game. I know BYU has young pieces, and that has its own question marks that brings with it, but they still have some core pieces that are together. Villanova's got 9% of its scoring returning from a year ago. So I think it's going to take time, and I think that time the NCAA committee has proven that they're not going to weigh Big East wins enough to overcome non-conference success to I think be able to make up for it. So I actually agree with you that I think Georgetown is better positioned. Where I wonder about Georgetown, though, is, and you touched on it a little bit, the perimeter shooting. Is it going to just magically click for the Hoyas? Because they still, I mean, Cooley's best teams were good from the outside. And that is a huge question mark in my mind for this Hoyas team. And if it doesn't happen this year, it's only going to get harder and harder, as you kind of alluded to, by the year.
Yeah, I think the players to watch that are going to provide some outside shooting are Caleb Williams, who's going to play the 3 and the 4 this year, and then also Langston Love. So those it's the burdens on those guys really. And Malik Mack can get hot. He hit quite a few threes in the Crown, but it's really night after night. It's got to be Love. It's got to be Love and Williams that fill it up from 3, and then everybody else is pretty much has got a. And also Julius, the center from New Zealand, he actually has 3-point range. But mainly, the Georgetown's is going to score by getting deflections, getting steals, getting out in transition, and getting buckets that way.
All right. So with Cooley's head start in your mind, you have Georgetown obviously in a better place this year. We agree. Mm-hmm. You have Georgetown as the 2 to 3 years in a better spot. That's where I think Villanova starts to catch up and things get interesting. I think this year for Georgetown dictates who's in the better spot over the next 2-3, because it's almost like a Danny Hurley situation. You better get them now, because if you don't get them now and you let them start to build some momentum, I think Villanova erases that deficit in a hurry, and they're on even footing, or Villanova could even pull ahead a little bit just because they have the freshness of the momentum and Willard's connections from his time at Maryland. That I think, for me, Nova's in a good spot to maybe be able to get them by year 2, year 3. Let's look at it long term, though. This is the $1 million question. Over the next 5-10 years, who's in the better spot of these two programs? Who do you feel like makes more tournaments and makes more tournament runs in the next decade, Nova or Georgetown, and why?
I don't know. Honestly, I thought the most.
You got to come up with an answer. We got to yell at each other.
I thought the most about this. Yeah, it's just.
It's a hard question, though, isn't it? Because they're so similar.
Yeah. So I'm trying to think now. What would have to happen for Georgetown to be the better team over that period? They would just have to have a massive jump in recruiting, a massive one. They'd have to be getting a guy like a Caden Lewis who's from the DMV. They'd have to snatch him, right? Guys like that every single year. They'd have to, they'd have to figure out the mix of when are we going to high school kids? When are we going to the portal? They probably would have to be a top 10 team in the portal every year to do that. If they just at this level, at the current level of recruiting, which I think is great, the current level of porter transfer, which I also think is pretty great, but they would have to go up a whole nother level in the next 5 to 10 years to be better than Villanova consistently. What do you think?
I think, to me, you have to worry about both coaches staying long term, because both have had wandering eyes over the course of their careers. All the situations, and I don't want to get Providence fans mad at me, because I've seen what happens when Providence fans get mad. I'll let that be your problem to stay on a loop. But, you understand why Ed Cooley leaves Providence for Georgetown. You maybe wish that his rhetoric had been a little bit different during the Providence days, and talking about his dream job and family and how he's put his roots there. That would something I think he would even admit that maybe he would like to go back.
That's another similarity. They both left in very messy ways.
Yes, very, very messy divorces. And Willard kind of did it twice, too, because it wasn't the cleanest of departures from Seton Hall either. Yeah. So, and I think Villanova fans, they feel good that this is a spot that Willard thinks he can win and stays long term. But you can't sit there and count on that. You're going to have to let that play out and always keep an eye on it to make sure that he doesn't get the wandering eye that has seemed to come up over the course of his career. But assuming that these guys both kind of find their footing and aren't in a spot where they're looking for that next job, I still think that Villanova has two big advantages over Georgetown that I think will win the day. I think for Georgetown, they're very reliant on DMV recruiting. I think that's something that, and while that's as right and fruitful a spot, there are not a lot of other breakout options for Georgetown, just because of A, where they are, but B, kind of what Cooley has set out to do with that program. You're going to get.
Would you say Villanova has a national recruiting footprint?
Not a national recruiting. I don't mean that in any way, shape, or form. What I do think they do have a little bit more of a access to is they get Philly kids, they go get New York kids. Harder with Danny Hurley doing what he's doing at UConn, but it's something that they've still had some success doing. And then I think that there's still just enough cachet left in the Villanova name. And the NIL, and the not NIL anymore, but the revenue sharing resources that they're going to put behind basketball, that I think that they can maybe get one or two national guys a little bit easier at the moment than Georgetown 10. If Georgetown gets it back rolling and Hoya paranoia becomes a thing again, then I think Georgetown's national stature is higher than Villanova's. In terms of long-term, what they've meant to the game, both have been wildly successful programs that have had their niche in the pantheon of college basketball. But Hoya paranoia was different. It was special. You talk to people that lived in the mid 80s, and Georgetown was the thing. The Georgetown starter jacket meant something in not just basketball circles, but culturally. That was a significant piece. But that's 40 years ago now at this point, whereas Villanova can point to the kids they're going to be recruiting over the next 5 years. They grew up watching Villanova be a perennial Final Four team that won multiple national championships. I just think it's a little bit easier to connect and reach out and steal a national kid or two, particularly when you get things rolling again. It just feels like an easier path towards getting things rolling for Villanova than for Georgetown right now, even though Georgetown might be a step ahead in the process.
Who do you see as Villanova's biggest competition on the recruiting trail?
I think, honestly, right now, Georgetown and Maryland are going to be a big deal for Villanova because of the DMV. I do think the DMV is critically important to Villanova. I don't think that there is necessarily a natural recruiting foil in the Philly area right now. Villanova's always had mixed success on Philly's kids. Philly kids. They went more than a decade where they didn't have a single Philly kid.
How'd you guys not get Rasheed Wallace?
Well, man, Rasheed Wallace is still one of the saddest moments of my childhood. If you had put Rasheed Wallace with Kerry Kittle's team, that's a Final Four Villanova team for young Matt Janis to sit in Section ND of the then DuPont Pavilion and root on. I still remember being at the games and the student section chanting, "We want Rasheed, we want Rasheed." And Steve Lapis will tell you to this day, they had him. Like it was a done deal. They left Rasheed the visit. Everything was good. He was coming. And then he went to North Carolina. Dean Smith worked his magic, shut off the lights inside the Dean Dome, turned them on, all the pyrotechnics, which at that time were unheard of. And suddenly Rasheed wasn't going to Villanova anymore. Rasheed was going down to North Carolina. But that was at the beginning days of Villanova getting back into Philly. They got John Haynes, the transfer from Temple, and then that led to them getting Alvin Williams, the Philly kid who put together such a nice career in the NBA. And then more and more at the end of the Lapis era, they got a couple Philly kids. Jay Wright had some success poaching kids from Philly when he needed to. And while Jalen Brunson's a Chicago kid, remember, big time Philly connections because his dad Rick played at Temple. He almost went to Temple actually. If Temple had just hired Rick, we were supposed to, then Jalen Brunson probably never comes to Villanova, and the world is a much different place in terms of basketball history. But that's neither here nor there. So Villanova has Philly as an option. They still have really strong ties in New York because, quite frankly, when you go to a Villanova game in Brooklyn, the Garden, or even Newark in Jersey, there can sometimes be louder atmospheres there than inside the pavilion because that's where so many of the Villanova alums end up. And there's such a strong network up there with in terms of working on Wall Street and in the financial sector that is a bread and butter Villanova area. So they've always had strong recruiting ties there. It seems to me they have longer tentacles that can kind of break them out of a tight spot where if they lose a kid they really want in the DMV, it hurts, but it's easier to create other options. Whereas Georgetown, they need those kids from the DMV, or otherwise they kind of start to recruit all over the country. They're going out to California, they're going to Florida, and that those battles get harder to win because if you talk to any coach, the further you are away, while geography isn't as important as it used to be, it just gets harder to compete for as many kids when you're going all over the country to try to recruit them.
Yeah, when Georgetown was rolling, they'd get kids out of Philly, they'd get kids out of New York. Greg Monroe, who played for JT3, he's from Louisiana, right? They also had Othello Harrington who played for Big John. He was from Mississippi. So
love Big O, yeah.
So they had and Carolina has always been good to Georgetown. Sleepy Floyd from Carolina. So they used to have a more diverse recruiting base. But I think you're right. It's got that. Cooley has pushed all his chips into the middle of the pot, and it's on the DMV. So.
All right, and then the last thing I want to wrap up with this. So let's find that common ground again. Okay. And this has been a really fun conversation with the Rasheed Carbon of the Bleeding Blue and Gray podcast. And how important would it be for the Big East? To me, it's critical that at least one of these schools get back to their potential. And if you get both of them going, that's how you ward off all these weird conversations that we suddenly seem to have more and more frequency that we all hate about Big East and their power conference status, and in terms of how good this conference actually is. Is it a top 3 conference anymore? Is it a top 5 conference? If you get Villanova and Georgetown clicking with UConn inside the conference, and then all you got to do is find one or two other teams, whether it's St. John's and their rich alums in New York buying everybody, or Providence creeping up from year to year, having success, Creighton, what they've been able to do in the Midwest. Suddenly, it gets a lot easier path to the type of conference that the Big East prides itself in being.
Yeah, I think if Georgetown and Villanova get back to a really high level, then the Big East is going to have 6 or 7 bids.
Can they both be back? That's the $1 million question to me.
That's the $1 million question.
Is it
can they both
mano
be
a mano? Can there be a coexistence where they're battling along with UConn for supremacy in Big East, or is there really only enough space for one of them in the way their programs are built and how they want to be successful, that either one or the other is going to be able to do it at a given time.
No, I think there's enough good players to go around. The money's got to be there, right? Is there enough money though for both of them to be great? But it would be huge. These are premier brands for the Big East. It can only be good for them to return to prominence.
Did you realize, and I didn't before looking this up, that in the last decade, only one time have both teams received an at-large berth in the NCAA tournament in the same year? And in this, how about this? In this century, they've only made it to the second weekend of the tournament in the same season once. That seems wild to me. That as good as these programs have been over the years, they've been decent in the same season, or one's been great and the other has gotten into the tournament, but they haven't been really good to great in the same year.
Yeah, but I guess I would look at the greater context of, has anybody been, it seems like that UConn has been running the conference for a while, or Villanova's running conference, and was anybody else good during those times? I mean, St. John's has been mediocre for a long time before Pitino. So I think it seemed like there was only room for one, right? It was like Highlander. So we'll see. But that would be the dream, right? For someone like Val Ackerman, that there would be several teams that are in the conversation at the national level. That would be great. If we get 4 or 5 teams ranked in the top 25, wow, then I would say the Big East is back. There's no talking about whether or not it's a power conference or not.
All right. And then as a Georgetown fan, I want to ask your personal opinion and what you think the fan base feels overall. Who is your, now that Syracuse is gone, because that was your natural rival, who is the team that boils the fan base's blood in the Big East?
Providence. It's not even close.
Is that's because of the Cooley situation, right?
It's because of the Cooley situation, but I always sometimes I have a hard time distinguishing between what is Twitter and what is message boards and what is the actual fan, the normie fan who just goes to the game and roots for their team. I think the Providence fans just hate Georgetown more actually than Georgetown hates Providence. And I would love to go into Providence and beat them. I would love for them to come here and get beaten, because I think that would just break them. I think it'd be over. I think they would immediately, the pitchforks would come out for Kim English.
Is there another team, though, inside the Big East that there's that kind of hatred for? Because it seems to me, from Villanova's perspective, and it's easy to say this because they were so successful for so long, there were teams you wanted to beat, and Georgetown is always going to be a special rivalry to Villanova fans, and it always crushes them when they lose that game. But if Villanova's not in the tournament and Georgetown is, I think 90% of Villanova fans now root for Georgetown to have success, because there is that, you both stared into the abyss of what could have been in terms of falling off the cliff of college athletics, the abyss that, quite frankly, UConn had to deal with for almost a decade, where they were trying to figure out what to do, what was their home. And now you're kind of in this together, and you want mutual success because it's good for your own program, but it's good for the league. And there's a league brethren that matters.
And we didn't leave, right? We're not Syracuse. We're not Boston College, right? We stayed. I just don't have a lot of hate for anybody else in the conference other than Providence.
I will admit the UConn fans can be a little overbearing from time to time, but
very overbearing. What? Yeah.
They win. You got to tip your cap to they win at everything.
You got to beat them.
You understand why they say that? They speak that way, right?
Right.
Hey, this has been a ton of fun. I can't thank you enough for spending this last hour with us and kind of figuring out, because for Villanova fans, we say it lovingly and we say it jokingly, but we also meant it dead serious. The prospect of wandering down the same path Georgetown kind of meandered down after they lost their coaching legend is something that scares Villanova fans. And it is kind of a cautionary tale to see an insider's perspective of A, how it happened, B, how you kind of avoid the pratfalls, and see what the path out of it was. It's really interesting for us, and it's going to be a fun year. I think I understand where you're coming from with Nova's got some gelling to do, but I think that both of these programs, while they have some real upside, have some proving to do.
Matt, thanks for having me on. Are you gonna come down to DC for the game?
I'm hoping to. You got to check out. I'm still waiting for my broadcast schedule, but if so, we're definitely doing a joint show though that week, right? Can we agree to that?
Absolutely. Now, I'll buy you a beer.
I can't wait. Looking forward to it. Rasheed Cartman, make sure you check out his podcast. It's a great one. Bleeding Blue and Gray. It's right here on the Big East Energy Network. And that will do it for us. For David White, my usual co-host, and for Rasheed, I'm Matt Janis. This has been Holy Noble.